It's a stalemate between Jonathan Kuminga and the Golden State Warriors. We're going to tell you how this ends in today's episode of Locked On NBA Game Night. Let's go.
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night when there are games here. But in the offseason, we got other things to talk about here. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On Fridays, I'm your usual co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast. I got Danny Cunningham here from Locked On Cavs with me. We're going to talk all things free agency, restricted free agents in particular. Danny, how's the golf game?
Oh, the golf game is in an okay spot. Not where we want it to be, but I think, Jake, we're starting to trend in the right direction here.
We'll see if Jonathan Kuminga is trending in the right direction here in a minute with everything, but I'm happy you're on. This is going to be a fun show because I think restricted free agency is super duper interesting, particularly this year. So we'll get to that in a second here. But first, today's episode of Locked On NBA Game Night is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. So let's get right into this one with the Golden State Warriors kind of in a stalemate with Jonathan Kuminga. Shams Charania of ESPN reported today that the Sacramento Kings and the Phoenix Suns have made offers in recent weeks, but the Golden State Warriors aren't really interested. Let's go over to Charlie Walters with Locked On Warriors for his take on what's going on.
Jonathan Kuminga and Golden State Warriors divorce seems to be wanted from both sides, but like in real life, each party wants the house, or in this case, it's the Warriors wanting something of value for Kuminga or a contract they feel is fair. Kuminga says their offers aren't good enough. He would like to be somewhere he's wanted. It's currently a staring contest that could drag deep into the offseason. Dunleavy and the Warriors believe that in the last week, they offered a fair market contract to Kuminga. JK said, "I'm good." Did not find it appealing. The Warriors believe they've offered the highest starting salary that is on the table for him with so many teams capped, but Kuminga didn't budge, and his agent will continue to look for sign-in trades. The issue is the teams that are interested, the Kings and the Suns, they have nothing that the Warriors want, which brings us to Kuminga and the qualifying offer. He could accept a one-year, $7.9 million deal that would get him out of the Bay Area next summer, but turning down long-term money to play for a coach that just DNP'd you is not smart business. It is an option, however, per the sources. Al Horford is reportedly on standby because of this. He's all but a Golden State Warrior. But if they commit the mid-level exception to Horford, then the transaction would hard cap the Dubs at the second apron and potentially make it possible for a team to swoop in and throw an offer sheet for Kuminga that the Warriors cannot match, thus losing him for nothing. It's a game of hardball we got going on between Jonathan Kuminga and the Golden State Warriors. There's no end in sight. Will JK bet on himself? And we've seen in the past players like DeMarcus Cousins and Nerlens Noel, it has not worked out for. Or will he finally come to realization that maybe his market isn't as high as he thought and just accept the offer that the Golden State Warriors are throwing out there?
That sounds like a mess. Truthfully, right? Like if you're Jonathan Kuminga, this is awful. He turned down reportedly a 5-year, $150 million offer a year or two ago. And now all of a sudden you're staring at basically an $8 million 1-year contract potentially.
And I think a lot of this from his side, like he's going to get paid, maybe not to that same extent that he could have had he signed that extension a year ago. But I do think no matter where he ends up, he's going to get paid. But I think a lot of this situation, Jake, is about control over his destination, right? Like if he finds a sign and trade destination, whether it is Phoenix, whether it is Sacramento, if those two teams could work something out with the Golden State Warriors to pry Kuminga away via that sign and trade, he's going to be in a place where he knows he's wanted and a place too that he wants to be. But let's say that he agrees to, let's just say what is being said here is true, and that the Warriors are offering the most money per year. It's the best contract for him. He's signing up, if he signs that, to be in a place where he very clearly is not wanted, I think, by anybody other than the owner. Like, I think Joe Lacob is the guy in Golden State that really, truly believes in Jonathan Kuminga and wants Jonathan Kuminga around. And let's face it, let's say he signs that deal with the Warriors. What are the chances, Jake, that he finishes that contract in Golden State? I would say pretty slim. Like, he is somebody that if he signs a deal this summer, his trade restriction will lift on December 15th or January 15th, whatever date he's eligible to be traded. And he'll be somewhere else by the trade deadline. But he's going to be somewhere else where he has no control over where he's going to go if he does sign that contract with Golden State. I think that complicates things even further in this just entire mess.
Well, so I think you make a really good point on something that people kind of forget about when it comes to NBA players, right? Like they're humans. Being wanted by somebody is a massive thing, right? And almost like any part of life, I think, when it comes to it, you want someone to want you, whether it's work, relationship, whatever. That does matter for players. Like, how many times have we seen an NBA player go to like a worse situation in terms of like on court, winning and all of that, but because that team like was aggressive and like showed they wanted that player, like that feeling of being wanted, I think, really matters. And so if Kuminga's just kind of forced to re-sign with the Golden State Warriors because they can't agree to a sign-in trade, and because there's no real cap space out there necessarily for him to just sign a bigger offer, like that's just a mess of a situation, right? He's going to be unhappy there. Steve Kerr doesn't really want him. Look, getting DMPs in the playoffs, right, when they didn't have a ton of guys to help you, like, really says something about that situation. And that's just where you lead to like an ugly divorce, right? Like, this is how Brandon Ingram with the Pelicans, from covering it up close, got traded for relatively little, because of how things just went. And at a certain point, you just got to take what you can get, particularly mid-season, especially if you think your season's going nowhere. And so it kind of benefits everyone to like figure this out now versus figuring it out later, right? Like, yeah, the Warriors can maybe get Kuminga cheaply, but that just means you're going to have to trade him for less, I think, a worse return later down the line.
Well, and I do think teams know the Golden State Warriors don't want this guy on their roster, right? Like, I don't think that's some secret, because if they wanted him on the roster, he wouldn't be catching DNP CDs in the postseason. Like, they can say all the right things, but their actions tell an incredibly different story than the words that they're saying. So that's why I do think maybe a team like Sacramento, and I don't know what the Kings and the Suns are offering the Warriors. I have no idea what those offers might entail, but I would imagine that they're operating under the assumption that the Warriors don't want to have this guy on this team. But I don't think you can operate the way the Warriors have, where they've not played this guy in the postseason. They've made it very clear they don't value him, and then also ask for a lot in return for him as an asset. I think it has to be one or the other, and they're trying to play both sides. And I think both sides are trying to play both sides, and that's just not going to work for anybody.
No, that's how everybody loses here, right? Like, there's a way to make this a win for both the team and Kuminga. And like, that's a great point. Like, the way both sides are doing this, just everyone's going to lose, right? Like, this is like mutually assured destruction when it comes to it. Like, figure this out, right? Like, if you don't want him there, don't force him to be there. There's a reason you see teams just agree to trade requests all the time when guys are under contract for years, because it can just create a really unfortunate situation. And look, I don't think this will go like the route of like Jimmy Butler in Miami, where some of those have been like really, really ugly. I don't think Kuminga kind of, can make that. He's not good, good enough, or I guess we don't really know if he's good enough or not, because they don't play him and haven't developed him to like make it that sort of toxic situation. But this type of stuff never ends well, right?
No. And if he wants to learn how to make it a toxic situation, he's got Jimmy Butler right there.
He's got the dude to
that's a guy that's
him,
done
right?
it a time or two. But I do think that that's a good point to bring up, Jake, because how many more runs realistically does Steph Curry and Draymond Green as a duo, like the remnants of that, the light years Warriors core, how many postseason runs do they have left together where they could legitimately talk themselves into saying, if things break our way, we can win a title? One, maybe two, like at most. I just don't see it necessarily very far down the line with them. There's a world in which they could end up sacrificing one of those years because of a mess they've created, because they refuse to allow Jonathan Kuminga to find a sign and trade. Like, I'm sorry there, but if you're the Warriors, whatever you were getting for Jonathan Kuminga via sign and trade is not enough to justify the downside of if it doesn't happen.
But also look at factor in Al Horford to this too. And look, it sounds like he's
Sure.
a done deal to the Warriors, right? So we're just all kind of assuming that here. But what if this drags out for another month and a half, or gets closer to the start of training camp here? Does he start to get a little bit nervous all of a sudden? And will he maybe just take another deal somewhere, being like, look, I don't want to wait. I don't want to be waiting for this anymore. I'm older. I just want to get my contract and move on and start preparing for the season. Does this then kind of, the Warriors haven't made a move at all, essentially. Does this then derail them getting the free agent that they wanted to? And while I think there's a minuscule chance of that happening, it's not zero. And how much does that set you back further? So cool, you re-sign Kuminga, but you lose Al Horford, and then you're going to need to know you're going to trade Kuminga later. So it goes to your point here of, cool, you just wasted this year and you wasted this free agent period too.
And teams that have a dark cloud hanging over them very rarely find success when they want to find success in the postseason. And if this Jonathan Kuminga situation continues on into the regular season, it's going to be a dark cloud over the Golden State Warriors, whether they try and say all the right things or not. It's just, I think we've seen this story, maybe not these same characters, but we have seen this story play out so many times in the NBA, and Jake, it never ends well.
No, right? It just never ends well. I'm completely with you. Just figure it out is what both sides kind of need to do with this sort of thing. We're going to come back to just restricted free agency and free agency in general, because I think it's an interesting topic. But let's get into some other restricted free agents, whether it's Josh Giddey, Quentin Grimes, and Cam Thomas. Their situations are still up in the air as well. We're going to look at that, how that gets resolved. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On NBA Game Night. Today's episode of Locked On NBA Game Night is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends and family? I actually literally did this on Monday. Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. So that's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. So with big money, you can save on tickets. You can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. I'm in Los Angeles right now. Shohei Ohtani was pitching on Monday. I wanted to go and see him. Opened up the Game Time app on my way to Dodger Stadium, got a great deal right behind home plate. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple, and prices on the app actually drop closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. And Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for exciting upcoming MLB games. Maybe when Shohei Ohtani is in your town. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making a Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen today and every day. We are here 7 days a week. It's the off season, but there's still big topics you want to know about going on around the association, and we've got you covered here. For your second listen, it's got to be Locked On Warriors to figure out what the heck is going to happen with Jonathan Kuminga. Get the local analysis on that with Charlie, who we just played for you here. But there's more restricted free agents out there. And look, it does not pay to be a restricted free agent right now. We'll talk more about that in the next segment here. But let's look at kind of the three biggest names remaining in Josh Giddey, Quentin Grimes, and Cam Thomas. And I think Giddey's is probably the most intriguing out of all of them. If you can call any of these guys intriguing, I guess, a little bit here. This one feels to me, Danny, that he's just going to re-sign with the Chicago Bulls, and it's going to be for not like a max or anything like that, but a good bit of money here. They got roasted in that deal for Alex Caruso, basically just getting Giddey in return. I think that was the whole deal, right?
Yeah, that was no draft, because that was the thing. Everyone's like, how come they did not get a draft pick back in this deal? Because they did the same thing this summer, trading Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro, and everyone's like, how come you didn't get a draft pick back in that one too?
Right. So to make that trade look better, right, you've got to retain Giddey, and that probably means you're going to have to overpay slightly for him, I think. Is that just how this is going to work out, you think?
So I actually don't think, and I feel like I'm going out on such a big limb because it's the Chicago Bulls, and that front office just seems to get nothing right now.
Horrible asset management, right?
Awful. But I think that teams that are in this position are going to start to they're going to start to actually use their leverage. And I think it's really interesting to see the way that the Houston Rockets have operated over the last couple of off seasons, because the contract they gave Jalen Green was an interesting one. And I'm not a big Jalen Green fan as a player. Like, I just don't think he's somebody that affects winning all that
I'm
much.
not either.
But I think that the contract he got, where they could have, former number 2 overall pick, guy that can put the ball in the basket, like, that's easy. I think 5 years ago, that's easy to say, yeah, you get the fun max. Like, that's not a big deal. We'll give you your rookie max extension. It doesn't really hurt us. But now with the apron system that we have, teams can't just do that anymore. You cannot just hand out max contracts all willy-nilly. And I do think that the way that they have operated, where when they have had the leverage, they're not making it painful, but they're not just giving in either. And I don't think the Chicago Bulls should give in and give Josh Giddey max. I'm not saying that he's going to be making less than he deserves, and I'm not advocating for him to be paid less, but I do think from a team building point of view, you have to find ways to save money on those margins. Like, you cannot be giving out max contracts to guys that are not max level players and expect to be able to build a winning team. And I think that is exactly the test the Chicago Bulls have in front of them right now with Josh Giddey, because he is not, Jake, a max level player. He's a solid player.
No, not at all.
He is nowhere near a max level player. And I think giving him more than, like, I don't know, $20 million a year would be a mistake.
And you've seen that in the past, right? When the cap spiked a number of years ago, look, I saw it here in New Orleans with, I'm completely blanking on his Solomon Hill, right? And then it clogs your salary cap going forward. And it really does mess you up. And in an era now, the second apron era, you can't do that. Like, you absolutely cannot do that at all. Look, the two teams with cap space, the Detroit Pistons and Brooklyn Nets, were like, we're not going to use it on any of these guys, because the time that we're going to be good, we don't want to have like one of those bad contracts on our roster that clogs up our books and stops us from doing something else. Look, you saw the Oklahoma City Thunder kind of operate that way. They had cap space for years, and like, now we're just going to trade for bad contracts that expire by the time we plan on being good. And we're not just going to overpay guys and then have to use other assets to offload them. And that's where you see these guys like Giddey, like Kuminga, and others just getting squeezed in restricted free agency. Really, all free agents, in a sense, it feels like right now, because yeah, we're in an era where, like, teams, for the most part, I'm maybe not the guy that should be speaking on this, are not going to make some of those mistakes and everything right now when it comes to some of those like moves that really make you scratch your head with it all. And so it puts someone like Giddey in just an awful situation, I think, or Kuminga in a pretty bad situation. And we're just starting to kind of see how this is all going to go. And there's like no playbook. There's no roadmap for how some of this stuff ends. And, I look at the Chicago Bulls and it's like, well, they're going to kind of, go into that like sunk cost fallacy mindset of like, we got to retain and we can't do it. But also, you make a great point, right? Like, no one's going to offer Giddey a ton of money here. The only option is the Chicago Bulls. So if you can save a couple of million, you may as well.
And I think that the way the league has changed, and I think it has changed on both sides with both teams and players from this standpoint. Now, I know we're going to talk about free agency coming up in a little bit. But now I think guys are more likely to take contract extensions and just say, we'll figure it out later. And I think previously, teams could have been, we will sign you to a contract, and if it's a bad one, we'll figure it out later. We will find a way to get off that deal. But now I think it has become a much more difficult thing to get off of those bad contracts, which means teams then cannot, and they should never be operating as if, oh, we can sign a bad contract. But now I do think teams have to be more stringent with what money they give out to who, because one single bad contract could kill a contention period for a team. It's the unfortunate reality we live in. You have to, as an executive, be near perfect to build a championship level team. It's really hard to do, but one bad mistake on a contract can cost you years of title contention.
Well, like, and look, it gets compounded by the fact that there isn't cap space out there anymore, right? It's not like you can be like, oh, we'll just trade him to the OKC Thunder or another team that has cap space and we'll just attach a pick. No, that cap space doesn't exist anymore. So you're going to have to take money back now too. And you're not able to like fix your books based on, like you were in the past. And that leads to Giddey kind of getting frozen out. Quentin Grimes is another guy here, and so is Cam Thomas. And I wouldn't put Grimes in Thomas in the same level as Giddey, I think. And we got to be careful here talking about Cam Thomas, because who knows who's listening when it comes to it. But like, look, he's a one-dimensional, undersized guy, right? Like, I don't know how he thinks this is going to end up going, in my opinion here.
Well, and I think that his situation is a little bit different because he's on a team that does have cap space, right? So like,
Yeah.
I think that he feels almost as if, and I can't speak for him, but I would imagine he thinks that, okay, there could be a little bit of money out there because when there's cap space available, that means there's money available for me. And what else are the Nets going to do with that? But if the Nets are smart, they're not going to use a lot of that money.
They're just not going to do anything.
Right. I'm not saying they shouldn't re-sign him, but you can't overpay for him. You cannot sign guys to contracts that you look at and say, you know what, we might need to attach a draft pick to this player to get rid of him in a year or two. That is just, it's not quite a death sentence for team building, but it is a big barrier when you want to get to the top. Like they can't sign Cam Thomas to a deal that you look at and say, no one's going to trade for that in 2 years. Sixers, same thing with Quentin Grimes. And I think that these three guys are sort of at different levels of value in terms of what they deserve in restricted free agency. But I think at the end of the day, all three teams between Chicago, Philly, and Brooklyn, all three teams right now have the leverage. And if they are smart, they will hang on to the leverage. And they can, I do think too, Jake, what's interesting here is I think that this can, as far as restricted free agency goes, I think that this could sort of be a precedent setting summer in terms of teams keeping the leverage and not giving in to the player demands for excessive salaries in restricted free agency.
So I'm going to pose a question to you here because I get what you're saying and I agree. And I think that's a really great point. And look, these teams should be using their leverage, right? Like you look for every advantage you can get in every aspect of everything with an NBA team. Do you think doing that can harm them in a sense? Is that going to bother agents and maybe make agents steer their players away from some of those teams now that some of the precedent is set and how they're going to operate?
I think it depends on the player. Like, I don't think that you can necessarily just continuously lowball players and underpay players, but I think there's a fine line between we're not lowballing you, but we are paying you what you're worth, but we're not going to overpay you. It's not about trying to get guys on the cheapest deals imaginable. It's not saying, hey, Josh Giddey, we're going to get you on a $5 million a year deal. Like, no, it should be a fair contract, but it can't be one that is inflated to say, hey, we're giving you more money than you're worth. Like, I think that it just kind of has to be fair. And I do think for the most part, agents will understand that because I think agents know as well as anybody. What is this? It is a business, right? How often do we hear that about the NBA being a business? And it is 100% a business, but there are two sides to that business. And I think the other side needs to stand up a little bit more in some of these contract negotiations if they want to be winners.
So that's going to have an interesting impact on future restricted free agents and unrestricted free agents. Let's look at that. And we're going to play a game of real or fake that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On NBA Game Night. And thank you for making Locked On NBA Game Night your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Monday, 7 days a week, covering all of the biggest stories around the association, not just here, but Locked On NBA covering even bigger stories as well. There's no shortage of things, even in the offseason, because the NBA never stops. Make Locked On NBA your second listen today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Danny and I are here just talking about all things free agency because I find it really fascinating. And Danny, on Fridays with John, we always play real or fake here. So we're going to play real or fake. We even got the theme music for it. Hold on here.
Oh, let's go.
Is this real or fake? Just ask John and Jake.
Ask Jake and Danny here. That'll work here.
Same thing. It'll work.
Same thing. So real or fake, Danny? Free agency, as we've come to know it, is done. Unexciting, done. Just not really a massively impactful thing anymore.
I think that is a real statement. I think, and I guess to say, I think free agency has become fake. Like I think now, as I mentioned,
you're a pro here. That was great,
right? You like that? I'm finding a way to play both sides while actually giving a real answer. What a pro I am. But I think that now more than ever, guys are going to take the money that they're offered when they're offered extensions. And there are a lot of franchises that are scared of losing star players to bigger markets because as long as the NBA has been around, stars have had the allure to Los Angeles, to New York, to Miami, as long as those teams have been there, right? Like that is just always how this league is going to work. And teams will say, we will give you a contract extension. Maybe we'll overpay you, which not always the best idea. See what the LA Clippers declined to do with Paul George and how great of a move just not re-signing him turned out to be for them. But I think teams will offer extensions. I think guys will take extensions because there is precedent in this league, Jake, to where, you know what, I can take the money and I can get to where I want to go later. Look at what Kevin Durant did. He took the money from the Brooklyn Nets and I'm going to get to Phoenix because I want to go to Phoenix. That has happened time and time and time again. And it's going to continue to happen with bigger names. Like, we are just not going to see huge names in free agency. And I know there's a lot of conversation. Oh, who could have cap space in the summer of 2027
like
when all these
doesn't
great
even
free agents will be
matter.
available? It doesn't. Who actually is not going to sign a contract extension that could be a free agent in 2027 between now and then? I don't know. Like,
No,
it's just not worth it.
No, it's not, right? Like, this is completely real that free agency is not going to be a thing. We're in the extend and then trade later era. It's not even like a sign and trade era. It's not even an extended trade in the offseason era. It's just extend, and in a year or two, you get traded to the destination that you want. And you're seeing players kind of exercise that control. Maybe they make it messy like Jimmy Butler does, or maybe they don't. And it just ends up kind of happening with that sort of situation. Look at New Orleans with Herb Jones and his extension this offseason, right? A guy that literally every team in the league would like to have as that kind of defensive role player. And you look at the extension, like, that's all the money he got. He could be an unrestricted free agent in 2 years, but would he get a big payday? Because are there going to be teams with cap space, or is it better to just take the guaranteed money right now and as a player figure it out later, right? It's kind of the opposite of what you were saying earlier that teams used to do. Well, we'll sign you now and then we'll figure it out if we need to move you. Now players are like, yeah, I'll just take the money and then I'll force a trade later down the line. There's a very realistic case that Paul George is going to be the last big name free agent we see for the next decade or so. I think it could be, because that was such an outlier of a situation, I think, and you just normally aren't going to see that again. Everyone is signing extensions with their current team, even if you know that dude's going to get traded in a little bit. Well, Donovan Mitchell's an example of that, I think, too. Even if it wasn't his, rumored preferred destination of New York, he got out of there despite having that longer contract on it. And in fact, that means you get a better return for that kind of player than you're going to get in a sign and trade scenario or something like that.
And I mean, who was the biggest free agent to change? I'm not talking trade like Kevin Durant being traded to Houston.
Right,
doesn't
just pure
count.
free agent signing
But,
into
like,
cap space, right?
Who is the biggest pure free agent that left a team this summer? Miles Turner. And Miles Turner's a nice
probably
player,
the biggest
but
one.
that's not for me. He's not a needle mover as far as this discussion goes.
But it's also, even that was just a fluke scenario where his current team got cheap, right? Like, that shouldn't have happened in the first place. And it took such a drastic move on Milwaukee.
If you follow the Pacers.
Yeah, that's true too. But it also took the Bucks literally, waving and stretching Damian Lillard in a dramatic move to do it. They had to put a ton of dead money on their books just to be able to do that, and had to make like other moves available for that sort of thing, right? Like, you're just not going to see big name players change teams in free agency. Like, we are so far from that, like, kind of LeBron James decision era of, Stoudemire, Melo, LeBron, Bosch, all of those guys kind of being available in one summer and then teams clearing cap space for him. Because now, if that were the situation, those guys would all just extend with their teams and get traded later. And then those teams would actually get better returns on this sort of thing. We're just in a different era right now where most teams realize this and are going to just operate as over the cap teams and use extensions to kind of make moves. I do wonder if this will eventually put more of an emphasis on TPEs, traded player exceptions, to be able to absorb some guys. I know we always make a big deal of like, oh, it's the largest traded player exception in history. And like, to me, those get overrated because they're not used all of that often. And you just don't see it like doing big things. But are we going to hit an era where, guys don't change teams in free agency, maybe those traded player exceptions do become even more valuable, all of a sudden. And we're just, the second apron era has completely like changed the way, the off season and the player movement really works.
I think the smart teams, Jake, will stop caring about cap space. I don't think that caring about how much cap space is going to get you anywhere. I think the smart teams will try and build their assets because as I said, as long as this league has been around, there have been disgruntled stars that want to be moved elsewhere. And if you have the ability, if you have the assets to go out and trade for said star, you've got a much better chance of acquiring a star like that than signing one outright in free agency.
No, I agree. I mean, Look, if a team has cap space, the way they should use it is you rent your cap space out to other teams for bad contracts and make them attach assets to it. That's what OKC did for years, and it was the smart thing. They didn't overpay for guys in free agency. They didn't go chasing names. They just were like, yeah, you want to get rid of Gordon Hayward? We'll take him, but put a first-round pick with it in some capacity. And that's what rebuilding teams, in my opinion, should be doing with whatever cap space they have right now. Look, if you're a fan of said team, it's unsexy. It's not particularly fun to trade for bad contracts, bad players, but that tends to pay off a little bit better down the line, I think, than overpaying mediocre mid-level kind of guys to bigger contracts. And we've seen the disaster that can be. So yeah, like overall cap space right now is completely overrated, I think.
Yeah, that's how you build a winner. You build a winner by compiling assets, by drafting well and developing young players into stars, and then keeping said young players while being able to potentially trade for another player that fits that timeline that is also, you know, a star or star adjacent, I guess would probably be the right way to put it.
Yeah, let us know what you think about free agency changing, the restricted free agents in the comments down below here on YouTube. I think that's it. I think we kind of covered everything. It's just free agency is not fun anymore. I used to be so excited staying up till like midnight waiting for the news to watch. I would have like friends over to my house. We'd be having like drinks and almost like a party, like waiting for the signings. And then this year it was like so depressing and so sad, you know, in the afternoon. I'm like, oh, this isn't fun anymore.
I just love picturing Jake Madison sitting on his couch on July 4th or July 1st of 2016 going, guys, Timofey Mozgov signed with the Lakers. I love that.
Man, when JJ Redick signed with the Pelicans at midnight, we were like ready to pop bottles. That worked out totally well, which is probably an example of don't spend a ton of money in free agency. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On NBA Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On Fridays, I'm your co-host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and the host of the Locked On Pelicans podcast. You can say hi, Danny.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm Danny Cunningham, host of the Locked On Cavs podcast. Sorry. That's not how I end my Sunday show with Swipa. So
I know. It's the chemistry's a little off here. It'll get better as it, you know, in the future with everything. But we appreciate y'all listening. I'll be back with y'all next week, and make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On NBA Game Night podcast wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. And we'll see y'all next time.